Today represents the apex or the byproduct of that hard work over the last 5 years with the release of an enhanced policy that we will now document and track and investigate to the fullest extent that we can hate incidents. And a hate incident, quite simply, is a hate-filled act or a bias act that may not rise to the level of criminality, but we all know that those hate incidents cause as much or equal harm in the community for those that hate is directed towards. We also know that acts of violence in the community just don't happen overnight, that many times there's an escalation of rhetoric, there's an escalation of acts where an individual or a group may transition from hate incidents to a hate crime. This will give us the ability to understand in our community just what the frequency or volume of those hate incidents might be. We know that nationally we have an underreporting of hate crime in the United States. In 2016, there was a little less than 6,000 hate crimes that were reported nationally. But if you look at the Bureau of Justice Statistics, they do an annual victimization survey in which nearly 250,000 people reported that they were victims of hate crimes across the United States. So that's a pretty broad gap. As law enforcement, we know that there's underreporting, just as there is an underreporting of all crime in the United States. But we also know that many of those victims that self-reported were subjected to hate incidents, not hate crimes, but yet in their mind they still believed that they were victimized as if a crime occurred. And so based on all of those factors, we worked with, the IACP worked with the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights Under the Law, a leading advocacy group in Washington, D.C. And over the course of 18 months, we produced the document that we shared with you that was published back in April. We've been working on this policy for some time, but we're able to transition some of the action items in that document and incorporate them into this best practices policy, and we're excited to release it to the community. With that said, I'll open it up to any questions that you guys might have.
What are some of the differences between this new policy and how the department had operated up until now?
Yeah, sure. So I can give you an example that happened last year. We had a white nationalist group that came through one of our neighborhoods, and they were distributing their propaganda. They put it into Ziploc bags and put a little rock in it so that they could throw it into people's front yard. Now, it was a mixed residential neighborhood, just like most of our neighborhoods in Arlington are. And depending on what your race is, you reacted very differently to that propaganda that landed in your front yard. And what exactly did that mean, and what exactly were they trying to convey? Best case scenario, we had a littering charge. That really didn't resonate with the community. But under this policy, we would at least know that it happened. We would not lose the institutional knowledge that it happened over time. And we could help reconcile if we had other hate crimes or hate incidents that occurred in proximity to that, to review if there was an association or connection.
So what do you tell residents then who would, I mean, if they say, oh, littering is all you could do on that incident specifically, what feasible action can happen? I mean, obviously it's not an extra criminal charge, right, that can be filed in a situation like that. Like, what would you tell a resident that's like, yeah, but what does it do?
Yeah, well, I think one of the greatest challenges that hate crimes and hate incidents represents is projecting to the community that you care, right? And so sometimes when people view an organizational response that they don't think matches the severity of the incident in their mind, they translate that the organization or the community doesn't care about them. And in this topic, for hate crimes and hate incidents, the entire bias act is targeted towards a group to make them feel that they are different and apart from the community as a whole. And so we would believe, and we would work towards our community policing efforts, that this is an extension of that we care about all people, we care about their protection, we care about their safety and their neighborhood, we care that their kids are safe and free to walk to school just like any other children. And we believe that this helps send that message, and we believe it helps set the culture of this community.
Chief, how do you ride the fence as best you can between where someone's free speech rights end versus where you have now violated my civil rights or perhaps worse?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And so one of the challenges in a policy or a topic or conversation like this is just that. We absolutely, and you'll see in the policy that we released, affirm, express, and will uphold the Constitution of the United States, which means people have the right to free speech. It means even though it might be morally reprehensible speech, they have the right to free speech. But free speech is not an absolute right. And we want to make sure that in the exercising of your rights, whatever rights those may be, that they don't compromise or erode somebody else's rights also. Because the 14th Amendment also provides equal protection under the law. And so we want to be very thoughtful in how we proceed with this. We certainly will protect all people's rights, even if they're unpopular, but not at the expense of harming others.
Is it a shame, I don't know, is it a shame that we're even having to, have these conversations, the fact that this is becoming a more and more relevant conversation?
I think that sometimes in society we have to ask ourselves this question. Although I might have the legal right to do something, should I do it? Is it the right thing to do for my fellow man or my fellow resident and the person that may be of a different background from me, maybe a different political persuasion? I think sometimes we struggle with the loss of civility in society right now, and I think it's every good citizen's responsibility and duty to make sure that we're promoting peace and civility within our communities, because peace and civility translates to prosperity and the attraction of more people, because it becomes desirable qualities for a community to have.
Do you view this policy as one that perhaps could set an example for other police departments in North Texas to follow?
I believe that this is a national best practice as identified by the International Association of Chiefs of Police, and I know that there are many other chiefs in North Texas and around the country that are working through the same challenges that we did to implement this, to implement it themselves.
Chief,
Yes,
we
ma'am.
recently had a series of incidents that got quite a bit of attention, and a person arrested after racist remarks, graffiti. Would any of it have been handled differently or reported differently under this policy? And if so, can you?
So we've been working towards the implementation of this policy, and so largely our operational response was already implemented whenever the incident that you're describing. But what it will do is it helps us to connect where clearly the crime that you're talking about was a crime. It was a graffiti. It is carried as a hate crime. In Texas, hate crimes are an enhancement to the penal statute of criminal mischief in this case. But it also connected two other hate incidents in town where propaganda was epoxied to city utility poles that was advocating for white supremacy, right? Now, were they related? No. But we had awareness of them because we've been tracking these things and we've been paying organizational focus on these things. And so we could have the deliberate conversation, is this related or not, and be able to rule it in or rule it out. And that's ultimately what we're trying to do.
More tools for investigators, I guess, if there had been a link to.
More tools for investigators, and also more tools for the community and for the police leadership to understand what is the data telling us in terms of the trend of information that might be happening in our community.
What are those specific tools for the community? You said gives you guys more tools, obviously, but what, if they want to report something, what specifically can they do that's different now?
Well, they can absolutely report anything that they believe is done in a biased manner. And if it rises to the level of a hate incident, or especially a hate crime, well, then that'll be captured now as part of our organizational response. But more importantly, in the document that you've got, it talks about activating the community and the community's responsibilities to help enhance law enforcement's response to hate crimes and hate incidents. If people are waiting for law enforcement only to address and solve this social problem, we're going to be waiting a really long time. We need the community's help. We need the community's participation. We need their engagement. We need their full support because we need collectively as an entire community send the message that bias-based acts are not to be tolerated.
Maybe you just addressed it, but what's your, because I don't know how many people will read the specifics of the policy, but what do you hope is the general takeaway? What message does this convey, from this police department in this city?
Well, it's a starting point, right? And it's an opportunity for us to connect broader conversations to tangible acts. And so, to your point, will people go and download this and read it? Some will, some won't. Some will be in a meeting or a public setting where I might be giving a speech at a future time and I reference it and then they go read it. Some might be experience some sort of hate incident or hate crime within their neighborhood and then they'll get galvanized and activated. And so what it does is it gives us an ongoing reference point where we can continuously tie organizational priorities back towards how we're trying to be inclusive of all people and protect all people's rights.
Would you say it reflects a tougher stance on or against hate crimes by this department?
I would say it represents a more focused position to where we're making sure that, that we are not only projecting that it's important, but we're demonstrating that through our actions.
Are these metrics and data, are they sent to the FBI at the end of the day, or, you know, what's done with all this data that you get?
Well, so
ultimately?
hate crime information, all crime information is part of the either NIBR's Crime Collection Network or the UCR, Uniform Crime Reporting Network, in which we supply that information to the state, and the state provides it to the FBI for national reporting. Hate incident data does not qualify to be reported to the FBI under those standards. So that is information that we have here locally to be able to evaluate the overall health of our community.
Did you have to engage a lot of community participation and input to arrive at this policy?
So we constantly are in a conversation with our community about these types of issues. And so we've talked to community members, community groups, both beforehand, but especially afterwards, as we start looking at this document in total, showing them what we've done as a department for the things that we have within our sphere of control, and then asking them for their participation and influence on the things that we absolutely need their help to be able to do out in the community.
What do you expect, I'm asking you to predict the future.
Yeah,
So,
sure.
What do you expect you'll learn in a year from now, you know, that maybe you don't know currently?
I think we'll do a better job of maybe addressing some of the underreported crime that's out there. I think the more we talk about these types of issues, the more we sensitized people to what's happening in the community and maybe what some people might experience that you may not experience, you know, because sometimes it's not the fact that you don't believe that it's happening, but if you don't have any point of reference or if it doesn't happen to you or somebody that you know, you just may not know the level or prevalence in which it might be happening. And so as I go back to the stats between reported crime and the victimization survey, I think that we'll do a better job of narrowing that gap of underreported crime and also projecting to the community the organizational priority that this represents.
Does this affect or hate crimes that would be committed over the internet?
Well, hate crime reporting is already inclusive of all crime. So in Texas, the hate crimes enhancement attaches to whatever criminal penalty is being violated. So whether that is some sort of internet-based crime, it's an in-person crime, it's a property crime, an economic crime, any crime that has a bias-based motivation for its actor, that comes into the penalty or the punishment phase once the crime offense has been successfully prosecuted.
One of the items on here, it's just looking through real quick. Track and report hate incidents, make the data available to the public, ensure reporting forms make it easy. Is that different than what it is now in terms of the forms having somewhere where they can check hate incident, or are those not public for?
Well, certainly we've had an opportunity to complete hate crimes reporting historically. This expands it to hate incident. I've already described kind of the bifurcation of where that data goes. And our next evolution will just be the availability of this reporting in our crime reporting online access that we have to the community.
You have some mosques that have attracted some unwarranted attention through different policy periods in the last 30 years. You have a much more international community than you've had for the last 30 years. Are these tools going to help you deal with some of the issues they face, you know, when things come up?
I think that they absolutely will. So as you look at any kind of bias-based crime or bias-based hate incident, there's no shortage of focus for people that believe that way. So whether it's a religious hatred, whether it's an ethnic hatred, whether it's a gender hatred, sexual orientation. There are prescribed protected classes both in federal law and state law. State law also includes the protection of police officers from hate acts where somebody is targeting them. All of those would be inclusive and offered protection and responsiveness under this expanded policy. Think we covered it?
Yeah.
Is there training that comes with this new policy?
So, excuse me, great point. It's also an action item in the document that you have about expanded training. Arlington has been doing expanded training for years. We've brought in national experts to both help our patrol officers have an enhanced response in the field, but also our investigative units and how we might investigate hate crimes better. And we're proud of that training, but all training is perishable. And so we will continue with that training in our strategic training calendar over subsequent years to make sure that it's persistent and it's ongoing and it's reflective of changes both in the law and in the circumstances in which we might experience in society as a whole.